So I'm going to speak a little bit today about a project that's in development called Development of Good Practice Guidelines in this space of technology and mental health. It's a project that we're working on behalf of the HSE, National Office for Suicide Prevention. And what I'll do in the course of giving you an update on that work is give an overview of the sector. That's what I'm going to try to do anyway. But just before I start off, I was going to show a slide, but Alicia earlier referred to the Headstrong and UCD MyWorld data, and that just based on the young adult sample from the MyWorld survey of over 8,000 17 to 25-year-olds, the internet was clearly the first place that they would go for mental health information and support. That's 77%, before you would go to a friend or before you would go to a family member or a health service. So I think the relevance and the importance of this, and I know I'm probably speaking to the converted, is without doubt now. I think there's some serious research to back up what it is that we're all trying to do. And just to maybe move beyond that, the data related to the over 8,000 young people, just based on some focus group work we had done a couple of years ago, one of the young lads in a session in the Crescent Comprehensive in Limerick, when talking about, what would you do if you had a mental health problem, this is what he had said to us. But I mean, what would any of us do if we had maybe not even just a mental health problem, but if we were beginning to be concerned about any kind of health problem? Well, I'd certainly Google it, to get a bit of information, to get a bit of knowledge that would maybe empower me before I'd say to my wife or say to a good friend, what I thought was going on. You'd try and get some sort of facts, you get some idea, and it is the first port of call now for all of us, and that's why it's so crucially important. The work that we're doing is learning, I suppose, from international good practice, but there isn't a huge amount of information out there in terms of what you can do or what you should do to deliver safe online mental health services. So I think Oisin had said at the start, we are the people who are writing the rule book, not making it up. We're the people, though, that are trying to find the answers in relation to how you can effectively deliver online mental health services at scale and safely. I think during the panel discussion last night, Tom said something about the experience at boards and having a realization that, all of this is happening, and where are the people that we can go to? So the people that you can go to are kind of just coming together now, where they're consolidating, and I suppose that's what we're trying to do, and this conference is part of that step in trying to, come together and become the people that you can go to and work with. So I hope that makes sense. Again, just taking a quote from one of the first publications in this space in terms of good practice guidelines from the Young and Well CRC, which has been referenced heavily. Just the idea that if we are serious about reaching young people and promoting our services, we need to be where they are. So again, just underlining the fact that this is really a no-brainer. There's a perception out there, and again, I think Alicia referred to it this morning, that based on the research with parents, that there's a million websites, there's confusion as to where to go and what to do. But really and truly, it's not that complicated. The Wordle that I had there was comprised of the 14 organizations that have come together with us to form a voluntary network called Technology and Mental Health Network. And on that network, you've got organizations who provide a range of services, and Aram has classified them in a certain way this morning. Oisin has just classified them in a certain way as well in his talk. I'm going to classify them in a way that isn't necessarily contradictory, but it's a slightly different take. I think we're all pretty much saying the same thing, though. That you can have information-based services and supports. There's the person-to-person support and online therapy in all its various guises, and that's obviously extremely wide-ranging. But also, and I think it came out in the panel discussion strongly as well last night, following the comments from the girl from Ologalaw, using support services embedded on social networking sites is obviously huge and at a scale that's really, really important for us to pay attention to and to work with as well. So that's one possible categorization that I think is broadly in keeping with the other classifications that have been offered. So the organizations that came together to form this Technology and Mental Health Network meet on a quarterly basis. The basic principle or the invite when the email was first sent around was, hey, we're all working in more or less the same space, doing very, very similar things. There's a perception out there that people are not working together, that there's a plethora of websites. Let's come together, develop a collective voice, and show that that isn't the case, and to really put some strength and backbone behind the sector so that we're saying the same thing and we're saying it in a coordinated way. The organisations on the network who contributed to a short survey that I'm going to show the results from are Aware, Bodywise, Samaritans. Sorry, I'm going to have to read it because I thought I'd try and remember the 14, but I wouldn't be able to. So Aware, Bodywise, Samaritans, Mental Health Ireland, the National Office for Suicide Prevention, the NSRF, Turn to Me, ourselves and reachout.com, Spun Out, Heads Up, My Mind, Relationships Ireland, Olaga Law and Drugs.ie. And of the 14, I think 12 of those organisations are represented here today, and most of that 12 have presented as well. So, that sense of sector, I think, is really starting to take off and be moulded. So, as we try to coordinate the sector and move towards shared good practice guidelines, we did put out this really short survey a couple of months back to ask people about the nature of their service provision. So what I'm going to show you next is just a handful of slides that gives you a snapshot of the sector, shows you the similarities and the differences between the different services. So at a very, very basic level, even more basic than the classification I showed a second ago, we can distinguish between mental health information and mental health support. So that was one of the first questions that we put to the organisations in the survey. And you can see, and it'll be significant later, most organisations will identify as providing mental health information. It's the common denominator. 13 out of 14 said yes to being an organisation or a service that provides mental health information. The one that didn't is just incredibly strong in signposting. That's what they do. But then thinking about mental health support as maybe something that's a bit more in-depth, that's not necessarily the bread and butter or the mainstay of all of the organisations. In relation to social network use, this is something that we wanted to explore as well, because it's something that we think about our strategy in relation to. We think about the ways that we can use Facebook and Twitter and how to use it. You probably would have guessed a lot of these results that everybody uses Facebook basically. Most people use Twitter. And then the organizations after that are sort of experimenting with the different social media platforms that are out there. Just in relation to some of the other questions that we asked, we didn't just ask about whether you use Facebook or Twitter, we asked about the ways in which you use it. And in relation to Facebook, I think 4 of the organizations in total said yes to providing services via Facebook. So there's some element of service provision via Facebook for 4 of the organizations. But by and large, people will use Facebook for brand awareness. In terms of the service model, and again, just trying to get the differences and the similarities in terms of how we approach the work that we do, I suppose most commonly people identify, again, as being information-based services. Slightly smaller number will provide person-to-person support, which is something that's been discussed a lot in the last 2 days as well. Again, social media support or providing intervention is slightly less common. But just to point out again that being information-based is something that's a strong part of our collective identity. Then one of the serious issues in relation to the provision of mental health services online is the extent of interaction that you can allow on your platform. And it's one of the first things that we had to consider and to really strategize about when we launched reachout.com in Ireland. We started off in the first few weeks having forums, and we thought about the benefit in terms of what we would get in the provision of forums versus the human resource it would take to moderate forums safely. So those types of questions, you can only be as open as you can manage safely, if that makes sense. And the board's experience, I guess, stands out here to a large extent, where I think the phrase tsunami of interaction and communication has been referenced a couple of times. But if we actually look at what's happening with the organisations that are providing mental health services online, it's not the case that everybody is wide open and allowing interaction between users. Many of them are, but half of them said yes, they allow interaction between users, and slightly more said there's interaction allowed between users and service. So that's one key challenge for us in the sector, I think, is to be able to increase our capacity, however we do it, whether it's through human beings or using an algorithm that Oisin referred to, but that level, managing interaction safely is a key issue. In terms of that interaction and what it means, what it looks like, again, a common denominator is providing asynchronous, usually email-based support, but also just to point to the category other as well, online support groups are being increasingly used by a number of the organizations in this space, and I think that's something where there's the potential for huge growth. I think some of the online support groups being delivered now are maybe they're just being developed, they're emerging. So in terms of the numbers of people being able to avail of online support groups, maybe it's small at the moment, but looking to scale that service model will be really interesting. Okay. And then the key question of moderating, and look, this is based on quite small numbers, but one of the key questions when you are talking about your interaction is pre-moderating, post-moderating, or reactive. And for us personally, we pre-moderate. So we look at all the interaction that comes to reachout.com before it goes live, and that was demonstrated by the guys doing the hypothetical earlier. And by the way, massive respect for everyone who took part in the hypothetical. It was brilliant. It was well done. And it is, people would ask you the question, in this day of instant gratification and people wanting to see their post go up straight away, is it not funny that you don't see your comment go up live as you type it? But it has been the experience, and again, it's anecdotal to some extent, but it has been the experience for us that when people have made that disclosure of distress, or they've typed their guts out onto the keyboard, that in itself can be quite cathartic, and to know that the person responding to it is responding to it in a very considered, careful, and measured, personalized way, that in itself can be reassuring. In terms of the good practice, again, referring back to the development of good practice guidelines, we've a lot of the groundwork done. Most of the organizations in the space have moderating protocols. Most of the organizations in the space of crisis response protocols, not all. But the thing is, we have different moderating protocols, and we've got different crisis response protocols. We are talking and we're starting to share, but that'll be one of the big challenges for us as a collective, I think, to come together and get consistency in relation to those protocols. And in particular, it's been referenced a couple of times, but we're working in tandem with Turn2Me, really just to build those relationships with the other key agencies in the space. And I think the Gardaí are the crucial ones from that point of view. On that, of the 14 organizations who responded, 9 have had to escalate because of a crisis situation. And typically when people escalate, it does tend to be through the Gardaí, but it can also be through social work services, contacting the ambulance service directly, and you can imagine why that would be the case, as to why you would either contact social work services that might be in relation to concerns about the safety of a young person or a family situation. And the final question that I'm just going to report on from that mini survey was just trying to test the water and just to see if the 14 organizations that responded are buying into what we're trying to do and are buying into the idea of good practice guidelines. We asked a final couple of questions and that related to whether A, we need good practice guidelines in the space, and B, you would use them. And resoundingly, 14 organizations said yes, we need these guidelines, and yes, we would use them. So a lot of the time, we are going to be much stronger together, and we need that collective for lots of reasons. Because funders want us working together for one thing, but it just makes sense as well. And I think that momentum is really starting to gather. We could kind of sense it last night, and it's been copper fastened again today. So that's part one. Anyone who's not already sitting at that technology and mental health network or hasn't had those discussions with us, just give us a shout. We want to open up to other organizations working in the space, and we want to start having serious conversations with the likes of boards and also with the bigger companies in the space, the technology sector essentially. So part two, I'm just going to finish up with I think it's probably 3 or 4 further slides, and this is it's kind of completely different. It's away from that short survey, and it's thinking about maybe a few more kind of philosophical questions. And it's based on the belief that good practice means more than safe practice. And I suppose my thinking around this has been sort of shaped and reinforced over the last sort of 24 hours as well. And it relates back to a paper I came across a couple of years ago. It was a paper that it was essentially a critique, and it was having a go at the website Beyond Blue. Our Australian colleagues would be very familiar with Beyond Blue. I don't know if anybody else knows about Beyond Blue, but it was initially a federal government-funded initiative in Australia, and I think some individual states took it on, and it just became massive. But it was very much depression focused, and this woman, Simone Fulger, started asking the question as to whether it was popularizing clinical depression. And these are fundamental questions, and relate to the scale that the internet has and offers, and it relates back to the fact that us as organizations providing mental health information online, wanting to reach that kind of scale, have a massive responsibility in terms of how collective and population-based understanding of mental health or suicide prevention is perceived by that population. I know it's very late in the afternoon for this maybe, but bear with me for 2 or 3 slides. So just in relation to mental health and our understanding, I think we do have to ask the questions and ask the fundamental questions as to whether our beliefs around mental health or models of mental health are the same, are right, are appropriate, are considered, that we've actually thought about what's behind the information that we're putting out there. So just to try and put some structure around this, there are 4 ways, or we can use 4 different dimensions to try to understand our dominant conception of anything. So in relation to, I try to think of things besides mental health, which I find it hard to do at times, especially when I'm at a mental health conference. But I thought about the family, and I just thought about the ways that we, the dominant sort of understanding of what family means, for example, and think about how we imagine a family, or how, if you close your eyes and think the word family, what comes to your mind? What do you see? So it's perhaps it's something like that. It's the traditional family. It's nowadays it's like 2 parents and 2 happy, healthy kids. But obviously there are other ways of thinking about family, and the dominant perception or the dominant understanding or the dominant way we visualize family isn't necessarily the only way to think about family. And in the same way, when we think about mental health, these are the first 24 images that you come across in a Google image search when you type in mental health. And for me, and I don't know how it comes across to you, but the brain features in half of them. I'm not saying that that's not right or appropriate. Well, I am kind of wondering it, and I want to put it out there. But it really sort of reflects, for me, images or ways we should imagine or visualize mental illness rather than mental health. And I think it underlines what's been dominant in our understanding and perception of mental health, which remains weighted towards a medical understanding. And just referring back to the other slide, apart from our imaginings or how we, the images we get when we think mental health, if we think about the types of knowledge that are dominant, the practices that we use in a space, and the type of human beings we imagine ourselves to be in relation to a particular part of public life. Again, I'm just referring back to Google. A lot of the time, the stuff that's coming to the fore, or the information that's popular and that's out there most, does tend to lean towards a medical understanding of mental health. And this is something that I think we need to sit back and think a bit more critically about and reflect on. And from that point of view, there is a movement within psychiatry, or there's people within psychiatry talking about the current paradigm. And I'm not going to get into the politics of a discipline that I'm not part of, or to overstep the mark in terms of my understanding of the debates that will be going on within psychiatry. But I do just want to point people providing mental health information to the emerging critical psychiatry movement, and the fact that there's a good number of psychiatrists out there now Smaller number in the Irish context, there's more in the UK, but 29 of those psychiatrists just contributed to a special article published in the British Journal of Psychiatry, pointing out that there may be a need to question what they perceive as a move towards a very technical and technological paradigm within psychiatry that's a move towards neuroscience or psychiatry as applied neuroscience. And I know I'm conscious that there's a few psychiatrists in the room, and I'm not saying that that's the dominant thinking within the profession, but I do just want us as providers of mental health information, potentially at scale, to think about what mental health means to us and what sort of messages, what type of mental health information we're putting out there. To try and simplify it, we, with our content on reachout.com, reference this, the message of critical psychiatry, the critical psychiatry movement, which simply asks that we acknowledge the critically appraised value of these 6 determinants of our mental health, so that we're not just thinking purely or predominantly about one above the other, but that we give due balance and due consideration to a person's life circumstances, a person's psychological outlook, what's going on in their brain for sure, but that we work and make sure that we try and get that balance right. That's it. Thanks very much.